Welcome back, everybody. I'm happy that you chose to come back this way. Welcome back to the MPI Podcast series. I'm your host. My name is Lloyd Wilkie, and I'm the founder of the Mindful Policing Institute. I have another exciting interview lined up for you. I invited a friend and someone who could hopefully provide us with a different kind of an insight. His name's Pastor Eddie Anderson. I know him as Pastor Eddie, and he's from McCarty Memorial Church in the West Angeles area of Los Angeles. I'm sorry, the West Adams area of Los Angeles, right? It's a historic church, and I went to the website, Pastor Eddie, and I just really was. I have to just read this if I can for everybody. It says, our mission. This church practices union, has no creed but Christ, seeks to make religion as intelligent as science, as appealing as art, as vital as daily work, as intimate as home, and as inspiring as love. And man, when I saw that, I'm bought in, you know. But anyway, folks, this is the pastor from McCarty Memorial Church, but I know him more for a different aspect, I would say, for his activism. And for both reasons, I wanted to have him on today to talk about both of those things. And this is Pastor Eddie. How you doing, Pastor Eddie?
I'm doing well. I'm good to be in the studio with you. The vibes are good. The energy vibrations are high up in this place.
Feels good to me too. I'm happy to have you. And I'm just grateful that you would take some time out to be with us. We've been bumping into each other, running in some of the same circles for a number of years. I think we've prayed together. We've marched together. We've protested together. I don't know. We might have gotten arrested together.
Always a possibility.
Just want to say thank you for being here, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself. For the person who's listening or watching the podcast, who's Pastor Eddie? Let's tell us your story a little bit.
Yeah, Lord, it's good to be here. Before I was Pastor Eddie, I was just Eddie from Atlanta, born and raised. In Atlanta and around those areas, was the son and grandson of preachers, and did not think that preaching would be what I would do with my life. But I went to college at Morehouse College, and becoming a Morehouse man, decided to go to seminary, and I was invited to come out to Los Angeles and do this work. And I think how I became pastor of this church says a lot about who I am, because initially I was a pastor in Burbank, assistant pastor in Burbank. And if you don't know what Burbank is, it's a small town in a big city and very much insular. The congregation was all white. I love the people, but that's relevant because Mike Brown had just got killed. And I remember zoning out in service, and they had to tap me on my shoulder and say, "Reverend, it's time to preach." And I said, "Time for me to go." That my people, Black people from all across, no matter where you're from, no matter your gender, sexuality, Black people are hurting. And me being in my ancestors did not die and pray for me to be up at this great church. They were calling me back home, sort of. So I ended up coming to McCarty Memorial in West Adams, South LA. And the congregation here welcomed me and said, let's do it. Let's revitalize this historic place. They said, we're a historic church. And I said, well, let's make history. So we've been trying to lean into that at the congregation. So I've been here for about 6 years. But at the end of the day, I'm a man who loves God, loves God's people, especially Black people, and wondering how can we do something in our generation to bring a little more freedom and liberation.
Yeah, man. Thank you. You talked about the historic nature of McCarty. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit. Tell us, a little bit about the history of your church.
Yeah, I mean, my church is in West Adams, but if you're from LA, you know that West Adams used to be called Sweet Sugar Hill back in the day. And so that's because of the Black folks was allowed to stay for a period of time. But the church was actually built in the 30s, so all white. And then in the 50s, they had a pastor who come, a white man, who said, "I won't come unless you do integration." The race is the question of the 20th century. He must have read from the boys, right? He said race is the problem, and as if we are Christians, then we can't find ourselves being sinful by being racist. And so in the 50s, they started this process of integration. And by the early 60s, late 50s, they were the first congregation, one of the first congregations in Los Angeles to be fully integrated, right? Fully integrated. Folks didn't, and then that led to the 60s. Where in the 60s, our congregation was one that was doing housing covenant busting. Anything about redlining in Los Angeles and the ways in which they keep us down and making sure we don't have active generational wealth. Wilshire was a demarcation line. Burbank was a sundown town. Glendale as well, right? And so they, remember the congregation were integrated, right? And so they said, they had a lot of people from Tuskegee and Fisk, some Morehouse grads up in here, a Bennett graduate, they had them in here, North Carolina A&T. They were going to the church. So they started doing covenant busting. And I have a member, I have to tell you, she's still alive. Her husband just passed away during COVID, God bless his soul. But they were the ones who did covenant busting all the way down to the empire, right? They were making it happen. And they said the Klan came running through. Klan was coming up and down Adams, trying to scare people. And they said, we're not leaving. They started using injunctions. The story made the LA Times, made national news. Miss Lily tells the story. She goes, yeah, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X came and they asked my husband, and her husband was a Black astrophysicist, and they asked him, they said, what you gonna do if the Klan come back? He goes, I'm an astrophysicist. So if they come back, I know how to blow this place to pieces. So they were doing that work. And in 1968, the congregation chartered buses and went down to Mississippi for the Freedom Summer. During the 80s, the congregation was one of the first congregations to do winter wet shelters for people who are homeless, right? They created that program. And in partnership, Murray got 14 congregations to do it in the 80s, right? So it's that spirit of activism that has lived here that went dormant for a little bit, right? It went dormant when I got here. Congregation was pretty much trying to figure out, are we going to survive? But we're revitalizing and activism and justice is part of that lifeblood, and we'll talk more about why that is and how that fits with the theology God has spoken to me.
Yes, you got me over here, saying amen. As I listen to that, really that history, it's deep and it's really rich. I don't think people know enough about our history, and if we did, maybe things might be different because we can look, we could have learned from all that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And we wouldn't have to keep learning some of these lessons over and over again. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we were talking the other day when I asked you to come on. This has kind of been prompted by a little interaction I had on Facebook. I was on Facebook and I noticed somebody posting something about BLM. And they were saying something about the fact that one of BLM's original founders had made some sort of statements in regards to Marxism being their central organizing principle or something, right? And so, this person was, just really, Marxism was a step too far for him, and to him that represented godlessness, atheism, and so I started, really thinking about the idea, and wanted to ask you, just in light of your own activism, and I know you've had association with BLM here in Los Angeles, and how do we answer that? Is BLM, is the movement for Black Lives, are all these activist movements, are we godless movements? and really, where is, I guess the essential question for me is, where is God in all of this?
Beautiful question. Yes, I am a member of Black Lives Matter. My congregation has been one of the homes for BLM Los Angeles. And I'm one of the founding members of Church for Black Lives. So I'll say a couple of things. One, God has always been on the side of the oppressed. I know in Western hegemony and in ways in which we have uplifted a white Jesus and colonization and all of these things, that we kind of lose the authentic historical Jesus, right? So God has always been on the side of the oppressed, so much so that when, in the Christian faith, when God becomes and incarnates himself into a human form, God chooses Jesus of Nazareth and Mary and Joseph, who, I will remind you, are under the control of empire, the Roman Empire. Pontius Pilate kills Jesus because he has control of his body, right? So we must start there. That God is the God of the oppressed, that God shows up as one who is oppressed and has to flee, and is also an immigrant and a refugee. That's another story for another day. But that is who God is, right? And so when we look at Exodus and Genesis all the way to Revelations, what we find is that God is always listening and hearing the oppressed. You don't get a Moses without God hearing the oppressed. You don't get a David without God hearing the oppressed and using him to slay Goliath. You don't get a Jesus without God speaking to the oppressed and healing folks. So God is the God of the oppressed. Well, beloved, Black folks are the oppressed folks in this yet to be United States of America. So when my sister talks about Marxism, she's talking about oppressed people rising up who find themselves with their backs against the wall, understanding that the greatest points of our tradition as Black folks has always been to stand up for those who are oppressed, that God always shows up in that way. So are we a godless movement? Absolutely not. Are we a godly movement? Absolutely. We are a godly movement, and that God is moving in us and through us. So that is how I would answer that question. And I'll also say this, that when we pray with poor libation, right, people, I'll just talk about this. I wrote a whole article in the LA Sentinel. I'm on record. You can look it up. The power of libation. When we pour libation, people say, "Oh, that ain't Christian. That ain't God." And I'll say, you didn't read your Bible, one, and you don't know yourself, right? That you are Black, right? And that the only reason that faith has meaning for most of Black folks is because it goes back into our history and tells us that there has always been a God that looks out for us. There's something spiritual. Libations is what do you think communion is for those Christians who are listening, right? What do you think that is, right? So I would say it's a rooted, very spiritual movement that when people are moving in these streets, yes, we call on the ancestors of Harriet Tubman and Nat Turner and Sojourner Truth and Ida B. Wells, and we talk about and we call the name of Trayvon Martin and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, but we are also moving in the spirit of liberation, and that shows up wherever the people are. So that scripture says that 2 or 3 are together, their God is in the midst. whenever we are on the streets, God is in the midst.
Okay. Man, I don't know how you could argue with that, right? But I'm sure some will find a way. Speak a little bit more about that authentic Jesus, would you? You talked about the authentic historical Jesus, right? Versus the one we have, promoted widely currently.
Yeah, I think we should talk about this, right? A good book for those, I'm a talk about read. So I invite you to read Howard Thurman's Jesus and the Disinherited. I read Howard Thurman's Jesus and the Disinherited. You need a starting point, an historical Jesus piece. But here's the thing: Jesus historically is a Jewish man, not Christian, a Jewish man that is born in Galilee, lives in Nazareth, born in Bethlehem, right? He lives in Nazareth in Galilee, cosmopolitan cities that got a lot of people in it, but poor. His dad is maybe middle class, right? A woodworker. His mom, for the longest, was talked about. Historically, Mary is talked about because people are like, ain't no God to get you pregnant, right? So she's a single mama, right? People are forgetting her name. And this historical Jesus is a brown skin, olive skin, living in what we would probably call now the Middle East or Palestine, right? Like that's where Jesus is at, right? Doing this work, right? And so you can't take Jesus out of the context and then expect to get some kind of savior, right? Because if you don't understand Jesus in context, then you lose the power of his message. When Jesus talks about beatitude, it don't mean nothing if the people ain't oppressed, right? Why would Jesus say, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, if the people did not give up hope that this oppression that Rome is putting on us is not going to end, right? If Jesus is doing all of his work, when Jesus says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, Luke 4:18, he's talking about liberation, right? Because his people have been tied in chains. Captives, be captives to the free, right? This is the year of the Lord's favor. And then he says, go and make history, right? This is the historical Jesus, who then, since you want to talk about it, Jesus dies, right? Not just for fun. Jesus dies as a political prisoner of the state, but then is resurrected with all power in his hands to show you the system can't keep you down. That God has something more in and that God has already shaped you and formed you and knew you from the beginning. That's the historical Jesus living, trying to figure out where to make it. That's why when we read Jesus and it says he has no place to lay his hair, that he has hair that is woolly, and he I don't know what Jesus, when you go to churches sometimes and they got this white Jesus who want you to, repent through not restoration, but repent through, repudiation and all this kind of stuff. Jesus ain't never asked nobody, right? Look at the text. When he heals somebody, do you want to be made whole? Restoration. When he talks about, saving folks, it's always, how do we restore you back to the ways in which I see you? It's not like, now you got to go and go in jail for 50 years and then come back out. Jesus said, I'm breaking out the jail, right? So we got to talk about the historical Jesus and what he was up to, because that speaks to what we are up to and who we follow.
Okay, with this, you're bringing it right around the corner where we need to go. Right. I wanted to also add, we're here speaking from the Christian tradition, but in my experience in the streets with the activist community, there are folks representing every tradition you could think of out there, right? And folk who have no claim at all of any religion, right? So it's a pretty big tent under which these folk are gathering and moving, right? So that should be also mentioned and highlighted. But you're taking us into this present moment, right? Where what should the people of faith, what is the role? What's our role in all this stuff that's happening right now? And apparently I mean, there's a lot been going on in the 6 years you've been where you're at, right? What's our role?
Our role is to bear witness, be carriers of moral revival, and have enough moral imagination that we can lean on memory, but dream of something different. You talk about a big tent. I think that's important. It's imperative that we have a big tent, right? If you go to Washington, D.C., you go to the African American Museum in Washington, D.C., and they have at the bottom of the museum, when you enter the slave ship hold, and they talk about the Low Country, right? And there's this one quote that I will never forget, and it just says that Black folks knew spirit before they had a name for it. They knew spirit before they had a name for it. That's what the role of religious and faithful people are. Know spirit, see it, discern it before you try to label it in this moment. Know spirit before you try to label it, because the spirit of God, or if you want to take it of enlightenment, of the universe, of El Dumare, the spirit is always moving in the same kind of direction. It's a spirit of freedom, of understanding, of moving us a little bit higher to see things as they ought to be and not just as they are. To be prophetic, not as in telling future, but as prophetic, as in seeing things as they are and then speaking truth to power. That's the movement. So it's being led already. We got tons of leaders, leaderful. Right? We don't need a king, right? People say, Pastor, you could be the next after king. I don't want to be the next after king, right? Because Dr. King wasn't even the only leader. There was leader for then. You had Ella Baker and James Lawson and you know, a whole bunch of John Lewis and a whole bunch of folks out there doing the work. Adam Clayton Powell, you know, doing the work. It's leaderful. And when we realize that we can take the mark. Okay, the people saying, we want to, you know, defund the police, people saying, hold people accountable. Faith says, now where's our moral revival? Where's the arch? How do we continue to move forward and see where is God working at in this moment?
Wow, thank you. I will be playing this over and over in my ears just for the inspiration. You know, I really need it. Today, and I'm really, again, thank you for coming on, Pastor Eddie. I want to move to this present moment, and I guess to the specific question around policing, because this is the thing that I've been focused on for 30 years, and I'm looking for you, Pastor, to help me, because man, I need some guidance. I'm really, you know, I've been sort of struggling with all of this, right? Mm-hmm. I got involved in dialogue facilitation at the beginning. You know, I thought dialogue between the police and the community was going to solve all our problems. Then I got involved sort of with the activists, you know, calling for more minority representation in policing, right? Thought that was going to be the answer. Then I wanted to fight for, you know, just a variety of things over the years. I mean, you know, there's been different policies. There's been, you know, we were fighting the chokehold back when Daryl Gates was the chief. Mm-hmm. You know, and we still fighting chokeholds all across the country, right? Well, anyway, I don't know. Anyway, I'm at this place right now. I'm in the beginning stages of building this institute to, I don't know, reimagine the whole idea of public safety and policing and whatever it is that we need to have happen. And you know, you know what I really loved? The fact that you used the word moral imagination. Because I have a poster right here, I'm looking right at it. When I first started this idea, I wrote Mindful Policing Institute across the top, and the next two words were moral imagination. Mm-hmm. And I don't even know what that means. it just, you know what I mean? It just kind of came up for me in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had that poster right there, and there are other words splashed on there, but those things were the start of this idea. And so, I don't know, maybe you could talk about moral imagination, but really, if you want to talk about any thoughts you have around this whole idea of policing in particular, obviously we are in a moment where we're concerned, angry about police abuse, etc. What are you thinking? What are your thoughts right now?
Yeah. So I approached this. I'm using a fancy word here, through a hermeneutic of being a Black man and a faith leader, and experiencing, racism and like the way the police have treated and tried to control my body and the souls I love as well. I also approached from a historical sense, knowing that, policing as we know it now comes from a tradition of slave catching. But I also have to give this caveat that I'm also an organizer. So my journey, when I started passing here, I also worked for an organization, LA Voice, and I initially was doing Trust Talks LA with my brother Delante. And we were doing Trust Talks LA because we thought, this is around 2015-ish, and we were like, we need to bring together the police, the community, the houseless residents, people experiencing houselessness, bring them together. So we did these dialogues, go down to the last bookstore, set it all up. People, go down to the Murray Center, set it all up. Go to have a Declaration of Interdependence, all of that. Then an officer stood up and he said this one, we try to humanize one another. Because he said, maybe we need to humanize one another. Maybe it's the training piece. Maybe it's training and equipment and hiring. And people will get mad at the table because you arrested my friend and why you beat me up like that? And you don't even say nothing to me. And people getting emotional. And then the officer said this. He said, it's not the training. He said, because they learn in the academy what to do, but it's what they learn from the beat officer that really determines how people do policing. And what the beat officer, in my estimation, I'm not a beat officer, but what the beat officer, what it appears has happened, carries out is that legacy of slave catching that we're always talking about in the streets. Us versus them, and I'm not a community officer, which is different than what James Foreman, a brother from, James Foreman from out here, I think he's at Yale now, his son who wrote this book, Locking Up Our Own. And he talks about when they had the first Black police officer in Los Angeles, how it would come to Black people before he was sworn in at City Hall. They went to the church in their uniform, and the people prayed for them because he got one inside. But somewhere throughout the time, that imagination of helping community or being a part of community, community-oriented policing, right? That left. And what we got was foot on your neck. So at this point, my summation is, it's not the training problem. It's not even a hiring problem. Blue Lives Matter, the whole thing, not a hiring problem. It's become a blue wall of silence problem. It becomes a cultural problem. It becomes, what is your actual job? And what does your badge carry with it? What is the baggage of your badge that people see, the trauma? Tried to work with Chief Moore when you first got in. I said, Chief Moore, you know that your badge carries 400 years of trauma, right? Do you understand for Black folks what that looks like? I'm from the South, so Black folks go missing when police officers come around, right? You all have been enforcers of the racist codes, not liberators. He said, I understand the trauma, Reverend. I'm gonna release a statement as soon as I get sworn in. still waiting. So what that has taught me in this moment is that with so many names killed, 600 people plus in Los Angeles, thousands across the nation, some high profile, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, John Kazee, Waukesha Wilson. I don't think we can redeem a system that doesn't understand that it is a problem. What I think we can do is reimagine what public safety looks like. Are there ways that you can change it from the inside out? Maybe, but as long as that beat officer is still out there saying rough them up, tough them up, you can't control that, then maybe we should rethink how this whole arrangement is set up. Do I believe in abolition? Yes. Do I think reform is possible? Maybe. What is more helpful, I think, is, and I'm going to be completely 100, if someone gets shot on my street, I want interventionist workers to show up, I want social workers to show up, and I want it to be a community solution to how we figure this out. But until we get there, if the officer has to show up, I want them to show up knowing they can lose their job. I want them to show up thinking about they don't have qualified immunity anymore. I want them to show up realizing that you got to know the people before you can serve the people. Cornel West says, you can't serve the people unless you know the people. You can't know the people unless you love the people. And if you driving in from somewhere else to come police my communities, every night I go to sleep in my house. I live right down the street from my church, and I go to sleep to helicopters. I don't know what they flying around for. I wake up to helicopters. I don't know what they doing. They drive it up and down Adams on sirens. Ain't nothing going on because they cut it off at the end of the street. What is that? That's the same thing that I saw state churches do to remind you we still here. We in power, right? So you got to change the culture. But if the culture can't be changed, then you got to do as the abolitionists, brothers and sisters, tell us, you got to uproot it. When Frederick Douglass says, get rid of slavery, he says, get rid of it in all of its forms. In all of its forms. And let's think of something better. We can think of something better. Can there be some things that we incorporate? Yeah. I mean, I think, there's some things that police officers learn that we don't know, but maybe it shouldn't be called policing anymore. Maybe we should be called something else that speaks to how we do intervention work, how we do trauma crisis work, how do we do emergency response work, right? Maybe there's something there that we can lean into because we know it. We've seen it, especially communities of color have seen it. Because for too long, communities of colors have the social contract between those who were supposed to protect you and those who are there, that has been broken for many, many generations. So people of color have always had I'll give you an example. There's a homeless man, a man experiencing houselessness lived across the street from me. I don't know where he came from. He showed up during the pandemic. Clearly has mental health issues. And I asked my wife, I said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, we're not going to call the police. So I'm going to call the mental health providers. They came on, they said, Reverend, we can't help him. He don't want no help. But he's been sitting outside this gate. So finally, a grandma and abuela comes up and she goes and talks to him. She feeds him a little food every day. And then she says, listen, you can't be out here on the street corner, on the sidewalk, people trying to get through. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open my gate. And during the day, you can sit right on the inside of this gate. Don't do nothing crazy. Just sit on the inside of the gate and we will care for you. And every now and then when it rains outside, she goes out to the laundromat and dries some hoodies and brings it back and says, here, put on some dry clothes until you can get well. And we're going to continue trying to find you housing and the services that you need. She shouldn't have to do that, but I'm so glad that she's doing that instead of locking them up, right? So we've seen that, and we've seen variations of that. So what does it really mean to have moral imagination? It means right now, police officers are doing 80% of stuff that they should not be trained to be doing. They're not social workers, right? Police officers are not mental health providers. Police officers are not tutors and mentors. They can have that capacity in other parts of their lives because they're human beings and they're members of community. But that's not their primary role. But our imagination has shrunk. But we have forgotten the dignity that there are other people in society who can meet these roles. And then maybe perhaps you can do something about the training, and maybe perhaps you can do something about the formation, something you can about the demilitarization, because I don't know why police officers, we protesting and they drove up in armored trucks and batons and helicopters. I said, are we in World War III? Why do you need this? I have nothing in my hand. And you're like, you're ready to actually fight a war, right? Like I don't understand. Like what's going on? Like we're not out here with armed rebellion, right? So the demilitarization, right? How you show up in a space matters. It matters for a pastor. It matters for a social worker. It matters for a psychiatrist. It matters for a teacher. It definitely matters for someone who's wearing a uniform. How you show up matters. And so we gotta maybe take off the uniform, take off some things and reorient yourself and say, you're human. Remember that first. And now let's dream about how you show up and what that looks like. Maybe it doesn't say police inside of your car. Maybe you need to say something else so people can be more open to you. Maybe you don't need a gun. Maybe you need a baton. They're trying that over there overseas. Maybe there's other ways in which we can have human design interaction with one another.
Yeah, I could, as I was listening, I was hearing the police officers on this side arguing, and I heard other people on the other side arguing, other points of what you were talking about. But I think if people are paying attention to what you're saying, there's some essential truth there that we need to be reaching for. We may not agree about everything and how we approach all these things. I'm getting some bad. Hold on. Yeah, I think that's a little better. We may not agree about all of our approaches. I mean, I know that there are many who disagree with what I do. I disagree with what I do because I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't know. I'm imagining, and imagination doesn't have any boundaries on it as far as I can tell, and what I've been trying to do is imagine what we could have post revolution. Right. So, once we've done all that we activists wanted to try to achieve, right? Okay, then what?
Yeah.
And so I want, that's the question I want to answer.
That's hard and meaningful work, but we need it, right? Because the question that you're asking is the question that I love asking people, and that Patrice asked somebody once, and she says, close your eyes and tell me, what do you see in the Black future? You know what I noticed? Most folks don't have an answer. And that's no fault of their own. It's because the society in which we live says dreaming about a Black future is dangerous work. Dreaming about a future where we are thriving and where all of our needs are met. And if it's not yet met, there is an access or a pathway so we know how to get there. It's dangerous work. And so I'll say, Lord, keep on doing the work of dreaming. And yeah, before Frederick Douglass could talk about abolition in its own forms, you had, I remind folks, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman working towards the same goal, abolition. They came at it from different ways. One went back and ran people up out of there. and one said, I'm going to write and change and move the laws and say some things that will ruffle some feathers, but I'm going to raise the consciousness about how we get there. But we're going to the same direction. So as long as you are on the same direction of, we're going to get to a Black future where I can walk down the street and not be profiled and followed and arrested and killed without impunity or any right, we're gonna get there in different ways. I mean, that's what you're doing.
Thank you for that. I need all that inspiration. Let's see. Well, I guess in the minutes that we have left, I'd just ask you to share any last thoughts that you have in regards to the moment we're in. I know you touched on another issue in regard to immigrants and refugees. I know that that's something else that has been central in your heart. You've talked about houseless people. Those people who have the needs right now, and so if you want to talk about any of that, or if you would just like to close us out in any way that you see fit.
I said we are at a third Reconstruction moment, which means we do not need to go back and reclaim anything, but we need to look back to learn and then move forward. So in this moment, let's not try to in this podcast, it's so beautiful because I think it challenges us. We don't want to build the same system. We don't want to soup it up and make it a hypercar and put some rims on it and bling it out and say, look, it's different. But we want to say, when we think critically, when we look back to the best parts of ourselves, when we get in touch with our somatic trauma and the memory, and we remember how we were dismembered, then we can truly start writing as architects the world we want to live in. That is the work of faith. That is the work of an activist. That is the work of Jesus. But most of all, that is the work of being human. Being human is always a privilege. And so may we all live up to the privilege of being human and investing in community and humanity with moral imagination, knowing that we are spiritual people flowing in the direction of liberation.
Man, you got me with that one. Once again, Pastor Eddie, I will probably be listening over and over to this podcast. There are layers and levels I'm sure that I haven't even thought about yet. I have to process it, in other words. Right? I think I'm just grateful that you were able to come on and share with us your thinking around all this stuff. And, maybe I'll have you back again sometime, because this was like just a blip, I really enjoyed having the conversation with you, and I think that the folks who listen to this podcast will enjoy it as well and gain a lot from it, whether they are police officers or members of the community, or it's an interesting audience that I think I'm cultivating here. And again, I don't believe one would need to be active in the Christian tradition to also be a part of gaining from this particular conversation. So thank you once again, Pastor Eddie. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being you.
Thank you.
Answering the call. Life is beautiful, man. I want to mention that you're listening to a cut called Within, and it was produced by someone or a group. I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's Leav. I think it's Leave. And I found them on Spotify in the copyright and royalty free section. I'm just saying that because, so YouTube doesn't shut me down. But also want to give, some shout outs to this beautiful music that accompanies us here as we close. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. And I look forward to hearing comments and further questions about the episode. Thanks a lot.
Have a good day, brother.